Yeah, and they've announced that, I mean, they've had to take a step back because so much of their economy is based on tourism, and with the economic crisis, there aren't as many tourists coming in, so they're reorganizing their economy. They're not going the route of China. They don't seem to be having massive privatizations, but they're granting a lot more licenses for personal businesses. You know, you can't hire someone else. But
a small bookstore.
Right. Well, yeah. Right. That was the idea. As long as you know, for personal businesses, because they've had to take a step back.
Or an artisan or a mechanic or something of that sort. If you're working on your own, and this has always been. I'm going all the way back to Marx. Marx says, as he says, no problem with private property. It's a matter of socialism isn't opposed to your owning things. It's opposed to your exploiting other people to multiply your holdings.
And remember, because of the embargo, the cars in Cuba are from the 1950s, and they're still running.
And that was one of the reforms that Cuba had. Was during the special period. You know, they'd been largely car-based, but because they couldn't get oil, there was an embargo on oil. They began to ration oil, and then they traded with China, and China supplied every Cuban citizen with a bright yellow bicycle. So every Cuban citizen now has a state-issued bright yellow bicycle, a gift from China. That was part of their arrangement. So.
Yeah. In the episodes of the Cuban Revolutionary War, Che Guevara talks about the fact that after the July 26th movement cadre, they sailed to Cuba to land on the beach, and the first thing that happened after they cleared the beach was that they were ambushed by an army patrol. And he had a split second to either pick up his satchel of medical supplies or his rifle. And he picked up the rifle, and they were able to regroup, and Caleb's laid out the rest of the story. But Guevara also said, he said, you can't sit on your doorstep and expect to see the corpse of imperialism being carried down the street to be buried. You have to participate in that struggle. And the Cubans have been, I think, since the early years of the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik leadership under Lenin, the first 4 Congresses of the Communist International, the Cubans have played the most constructive and consistent role in rebuilding an international communist leadership in the world. And it's been the product of international collaboration by people like Guevara, who were not born in Cuba, but realized that, well, Cuba is the trench we're fighting in right now, but it's all part of a world struggle. And that's why international solidarity has always been a centerpiece of Cuba's revolutionary program, that they understood that they were part of a world struggle. They weren't just going to build a wall around Cuba and make a paradise. They understood that the only way for the struggle to go forward in Cuba was for the struggle to go forward in other places too. And that concrete understanding of solidarity is also what inspired Guevara to go on his internationalist missions. In his speech to what was called the Tricontinental Congress that was held in Havana, which was a kind of an initial meeting for a regroupment of revolutionary forces in the South, the global South. He said that the most pivotal thing to do in 1967 is to create 2 or 3 more Vietnams. To number 1, take the heat off the Vietnamese, and number 2, put the heat on the imperialists, because once they're fighting someplace, it'll be easier to defeat them if we build this strategy. And it's kind of similar to the People's War strategy that was outlined by Lin Biao that we talked about a few weeks ago. The Cuban Revolution was an inspiration not just for people who actively collaborated with Cuba, but for revolutionaries around the world, no matter whether they were in post-colonial countries or in imperialist countries. A lot of young people in the United States were first radicalized when they became part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which was led by labor militants and also by Robert Williams, who was black liberation fighter in the south of the United States fighting against Jim Crow.
North Carolina.
And, he believed in armed self-defense against the attacks of racist gangs.
He was given exile in Cuba and broadcast a Radio Free Dixie, which was an underground...
And that was long wave. You could get it in Youngstown. Yes, I remember that. And when you look at the map, you can see there's a direct line from Havana to Youngstown.
Right. So, the Cuban leadership was the first communist leadership that didn't have to fight their way out of the tradition of Stalinism that had taken over the Comintern by the late 1920s. They had to contend with the old Cuban Socialist Party, Stalinists, and politically isolate and defeat them out in order to build the Cuban Communist Party. But it was one of the first authentic organizations since the time of the Bolsheviks in the early years of the Comintern that kind of, came to the conquest of an understanding of Marxism as part of a brutal struggle against imperialism, which goes on and on. The thousands and thousands of provocations and insults to the dignity of the Cuban people. It's a scandal of historic proportions.
Yeah, countries that trade with Cuba are fined by the U.S. The U.S. punishes countries that trade with Cuba.
But I think the major thing I just wanted to say is that as communists or activists here in the United States, there is a lot that we can learn, just like there's a lot that we can learn from the Bolsheviks, there's a lot we can learn from Marx and Engels, there's a lot we can learn from, not just from great individuals like Castro or Guevara, but from the whole political heritage of the Cuban Revolution, and the fact that there are millions of communists in Cuba, not just 2,000 or 3,000 party officials with good ideas. There are millions of communists in Cuba who know they're in a period when they're having to make retreats and who are looking out and trying to reach out everywhere they can around the world with medical solidarity, with any kind of solidarity they can find to break out of their isolation and enrich their own experience, and also show people that you can, with a new material foundation, create new people based on the idea of social solidarity, and that is the way forward for humanity.
The first time that I was in Cuba, there were no TV sets in the hotel that we were in. It was a major hotel, but there were no TV sets there. It was the 1979. It was the 20th anniversary of the Cuban Revolution. At any rate, Ted and I forget now, but we were going out in the afternoon, and some of the hotel workers said to us that, or they told us that Fidel was going to speak on TV, and they invited us to their
break room?
To their
Like
what do you
lounge
call it? An employee lounge.
Right.
Okay. They were all sitting in front of the TV set, and when Fidel started to speak, it was just a phenomenon that I have not seen anywhere else.